You know what? This one's going to be a little bit different than a lot of the other author diaries that I've done, which is in the fact that I didn't have the idea to do, like, pretty much every topic I've talked about in one of these so far was something that eventually I figured I was going to talk about. I have a list of topics that I figured that I would get to, or at least intend to at some point. I may decide I don't have enough to say about some of them, but this wasn't on the list. This actually occurred to me while I was in the middle of editing, because that's the point in the process that I am at time of recording. Now, the general statement, and also the title of this thing, if I end up going with it, which is that know your strengths and your weaknesses, that sounds like, well, duh, but I kind of want to filter that through some things that I've realized through the experience of having the book beta read and then working with an editor. Because, first of all, here's the first thing that I want you to understand. Don't assume that you already know your strengths and weaknesses. Because, look, I was going to say I don't think any serious creative person thinks their stuff is perfect all the time, except some people actually seem to. And if you honestly think your stuff is perfect, especially before it's gotten into the hands of an editor or an audience and you've gotten feedback, I don't know how to talk to you. But short of that kind of insane level of confidence, I think most of us at least understand that we're going to have things that we're good at and some things that we're not good at. But that doesn't necessarily mean we know what they are or why they are the case. And I think a lot of us have our presumptions, like, I feel like I'm good at this. I feel like I'm not very good at this. But honestly, you're not going to be the best judge of that because you live in your own head and you spin through these cycles of reading these things and going through your own levels of criticism, and you can't be objective about it. You never will be able to. Once you start getting feedback, you might find out that something that you didn't think you were that good at, people are really taking to, or you might think that something that you kind of had a handle on isn't working for people. And that's a big part of paying proper attention to beta readers and your editor. So, like I said, I'm going to give some specific examples that I've kind of been going through. First, let's start with something that kind of happened in the beta reading process. So, I've always known that I gravitate to dialogue. I really enjoy writing dialogue. Actually, more often than not, dialogue's the first thing that I write in a scene. I'll write out the dialogue and then build the rest of the scene around it once the dialogue's already written, because that for me just flows the most naturally, coming up with what one person's going to say than the other. If I were to take a guess, I think this has to do with my background in theater. Now, I say background, like, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this up to this point. I don't have a degree in anything. So when I say background, I mean like high school theater, college theater, community theater, auditioning to try and do professional theater, never getting anywhere. But, I have a background in things where the way that things are communicated are either through stage directions, which are just going to give you a few notes, or through dialogue. So I really tend to zero in on dialogue when I'm reading, and I definitely zero in on it when I'm writing. I didn't think too much about that before actually getting the book into the hands of beta readers, because it was just something that, I guess I never made the leap that because that was easy for me to write that it would actually be any good, but I got a lot of positive feedback on quite a bit of the dialogue, and it seems to, it does make sense once I stopped and thought about it. Oh, the thing that is easy for me to do, part of the reason it's easy is because I actually seem to be okay at it. But then there's what I found out, or what I've come to realize in the process of editing, which is that I have a tendency to flatly describe the emotion of a character as opposed to indicating the emotion through descriptions of actions or facial expressions or things like that. Now, I haven't literally written this, but basically it's saying something to the effect of this person was mad, as opposed to saying this person clenched their fists and got red in the face. My writing, while not that blunt, leaned more towards the former. And it wasn't something that I really realized I was doing, but I got a fair amount of notes back from my editor that were variants of describe this through action. Now, that's a little bit more specific than show, don't tell, though it's a variant of it. Basically saying, look, here's this thing that's going on with this character. have it displayed through something they are doing. And I honestly am super appreciative to my editor for the fact that they wrote describe through action as opposed to writing show don't tell, because I wouldn't have necessarily known how to roll with that feedback, especially if it came up a whole bunch. But here's what I realized. Remember how I said I kind of have my background in theater, and that's kind of why I gravitate towards dialogue? Well, this is almost kind of a supplementary effect of that, because when you look at a script, be it a film script, a theater script, what have you, generally, unless it is super important that characters do something very specific physically, the notes for what you are to do as an actor portraying that character physically are pretty sparse. If you need to cross from one place to another, it'll say that, but it won't necessarily say exactly how you should do that, the way that you should walk, the speed at which you should do it, unless it is incredibly important. If there's a fight and somebody needs to throw a punch, yeah, it'll point that out, but it's not going to say, what you're doing with every line. So as an actor, you make all these decisions about, do you stick your hands in your pocket? Do you kind of fidget? Do you meet the eye of the person that you're talking to? Or do you look away? Do you fold your arms? All these things are usually in most scripts left up to the actor to decide to do. And it will sometimes say, like in parentheses, angrily, sadly, forlornly, whatever, as an emotional cue with here's the intent behind the line, you decide what that means in terms of how you play it. And because my brain seems to basically default to scripts as opposed to I've enjoyed writing prose, but that's not how my brain organizes fiction in my head. My brain organizes it like a script. It breaks it down into scenes that shift with every location. Actually, earliest draft of the book, every single location change, which would have been a scene change in a film, was a new chapter. I ended up consolidating and condensing a bit of that because it resulted in way more chapters than there actually needed to be. But again, that has to do with just the way that my brain breaks it down. And I realized that was why I had been writing more about what the emotion of the character was instead of describing the action, which would then illustrate the emotion. I was looking at it, for lack of a better way to put it, I was looking at it from the perspective of an actor instead of the perspective of an audience. Because as a performer, I would prefer to not have everything dictated to me by the script and to give me the freedom and the ability to interpret that and how I think it will come across best. But this is a book, not a play. There isn't an actor who's going to interpret that, and most readers are not expecting to do that amount of legwork in terms of visualizing what a character is doing. I do that to a certain degree, but again, that has to do with my headspace and where sort of my creative background comes from and sort of the default mindset that I've got. But most readers are coming at it from the perspective of the audience, which isn't that they are reading, here's the emotion, and then they get to interpret what it is. Most people from an audience perspective are going to read this and go, tell me what I'm seeing. I will know what it means, but tell me specifically what I'm seeing. So it's as if I had been writing the book to be performed by an acting troupe that doesn't exist, and I was expecting them to carry some of the weight in terms of the physicality of the characters and what visually they were doing as they deliver certain lines or whatnot. I wasn't failing to do it altogether, but I was only ever doing it if I had something really specific in mind. I was treating it like a play. I was treating it like there were going to be actors who were going to interpret this for an audience. There aren't. I'm speaking directly to an audience. That's what readers are. It's just been a really interesting thing to sort of realize about myself. And it's one of those things that honestly it can be insightful and a great benefit from working with someone who doesn't necessarily think the way you do and can bring a new perspective for the words you put down. So this was more kind of just a vlog of just something I've learned about my own writing in the course of the editing process. But I don't know. I found it neat to sort of realize that about myself and to hopefully in future try and account for it. But there you go. We'll wrap it up there. Probably by the time this comes out, the Kickstarter will be done or nearly done. And that's been insane. I raised over double what I asked for. So yeah, I've got a lot of stuff to do once that closes. But in any case, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I have a Patreon. I have other stuff. Check those out. Feel free, but don't worry about it. No pressure, because this is just a place to come back to the next time you need a break.